I could just imagine how many times somebody had pitched the Revolutionary War to history. So I wanted to try and find something different, if there was something different. It made me think, well, wait a minute, is there any way that the 1760s were like the 1960s? You know, there's a revolution, so is there any relation? So I called up the people at my company and said, how can we find out if there was any teen angst in the Revolutionary War? They looked into it for a couple of hours, found the Sons of Liberty story, which is all these guys, Paul Revere, John Hancock, Sam Adams, John Adams, all in their 20s and early 30s, and called me back and they said, oh my God, this is an amazing story that somehow we all don't know. It was a new twist on the Revolutionary War that somehow no one has made before.
I've always loved history, and so for me, every time I dive into any historical story, just what I learn alone is so inspiring. We are telling a story that has an authenticity to it, but not necessarily an accuracy. And so it was making sure that we had the spirit of what the story we're telling, which is this, you know, irreverent, iconic group of men who came together as rebellious spirits to create a country.
It was a big process to do all of the research and figure out what story we were going to tell in Sons of Liberty. So you're talking about 11 years of history we're covering over 6 hours. So what do you tell from those 11 years in those 6 hours?
So it's really trying to find the core of each character, how that plays within each scene, and then stitching it together in a way that the audience just has a wild ride and a fun ride, you know, to rediscover how this country was imagined.
I'm fascinated by the characters in period dramas. There are great shows where they make up characters. But then if you look in history, there are things that people did that if you made up, no one would believe.
We try to embody that with our characters.
If you're invested in the characters, the history will hit you much harder because it has to do with somebody's life.
History books and history teachers think that for us to respect them, they had to have a certain kind of stature. Actually, when you think about what they did from a straight revolutionary, rebellious angle, they were rock stars.
None of these guys started this because they wanted to start a country. They all started this for personal reasons. Never in a million years would I have guessed that Sam Adams was really the person that started this country.
This is kind of lost in our recollections of this era in history, is that not everybody in the colonies was ready for revolution. They were British, and they were used to a status quo that a lot of people liked. And Sam Adams was unhappy with that status quo very early on, and he was instrumental in kind of galvanizing all of the colonies to action against the British and in the name of revolution.
Sam was, at the end of the day, was the heart and soul of the movement, but it was from a passionate place, not necessarily from a strategic place.
Tell General Gage I send my regards. Cheers.
I did some reading around the period, and it was interesting to come across chapters about some of the very specific moments that are contained within our script. And you get quite excited because you think, oh, we've got a scene about that. That's a real thing that happened. And of course, these events are recorded only in literary fashion, and there's different accounts of them from different people's perspectives. And so you kind of have a little bit of license, I think, to make it as visual as you can, because we're making this story for a visual medium.
Hancock was the big world, because he actually understood the larger politics, the money, the practicalities of it all. And he had to lose everything he had in order to gain everything he became.
John Hancock was this spoiled, rich guy. People actually used to throw manure at his carriage when he went by. That's how much they didn't like him.
John Hancock was one of the multitudes that actually thought being British was a badge of honor that was beneficial to his life and to the lives of everyone.
Playing a character from history, you have huge responsibilities, but also it's a blank canvas. because there's no recordings of the way that John Hancock sounded. There's no photographs of the way that he looked. So you can make it up. Where plain facts and history can't help you, certain things can, like his signature. Now, he was famous for signing his name in a big way, the biggest name on the Declaration, right? Now, that to me is a clue about someone's personality. I think it was part of a flamboyant nature, and also we look at portraits of him, he was beautifully dressed and obviously took care of himself. So those are the things that I've imbued in the character. So that actually was one of the biggest things of my interpretation of it, was my reading of why his signature was so big and flowery. So that was a real help to me, actually.
We need to send a message to London, one that is heard. They won't listen to Boston alone, but the voice of 13 united colonies, that they cannot ignore.
John Adams was more of the strategist.
At this time, when we start the show, 1765, he was basically an ambulance chaser lawyer. He was trying to make something of his life, but he was not what we think of John Adams.
He considered himself an Englishman, like a lot of the colonists considered themselves English people. But I think John Adams had a disdain for injustice above all, because he really believed in the letter of the law. Like a lot of educated in Enlightenment people, they felt that the world was ordered and law was somehow a godlike design.
Paul Revere is an extraordinary character from the history of America. A man's man, a true revolutionary, a fighter, and a dentist.
Paul Revere was way back early days, super covert spy type of guy, and he had all these spy rings everywhere and information going here and there, and they're doing secret raids.
He would go get the information, bring it back to the various groups he was a part of, the Freemasons, the Committee of Correspondence, the Sons of Liberty, etc., where it would be digested and then interpreted, and then they would get the word out, whatever word that needed to be, to the other colonies. And as a member of the Committee of Correspondence, that was another part of his duties, was to get on his horse and take a ride to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or Philadelphia, or wherever, and start assembling groups in those towns.
Of all characters, he's the one who, in a way, was the most together, because he kind of brought the organization to it. But he also takes no prisoners, so he just, no filter between brain and mouth.
And remember, we keep the colors. Send their officers back to Boston without their honor.
And that initially was the first thing that jumped out to me about Paul Revere and made him a fascinating character. It was Joseph Warren that initially brought Revere into what would become the Sons of Liberty. The triumvirate of Sam Adams, Hancock, and Joseph Warren. Warren, had he not died at Bunker Hill, he may have outshone those two guys in history.
Warren dying was probably his biggest contribution to the revolution. He was a general when Bunker Hill happened. If he was getting into it to be famous or something, he could have sat on his horse and been the general and hoped that the battle went well, and then hoped that someone would say, General Warren, won this battle. But he fought on the front lines with these guys. It was really a symbol of American spirit, because his death, I think, inspired people to keep fighting. It also let everyone know that it was really happening, that it was too late to turn back.
He was an integral part of the Sons of Liberty and doesn't really get his due in American history, but I think hopefully this show will kind of shed some light on him and his life and his work.
I must urge caution, Mrs. Gage. These roads can be a little rough.
I appreciate your concern, Dr. Warren, but I have to tell you, I'm not a terribly cautious woman.
One of the things that's fascinating about the American Revolution is the intelligence gathering that took place. And they think this is fairly historically accurate, that Margaret slipped a letter to Warren, warning him that the British were coming to arrest Sam Adams and John Hancock, and then Warren passed this information to Revere and to Dawes, who went on the famous midnight ride.
So what we do know about Margaret is that she had divided loyalties. She was married to a British man, but she was colonial herself. We do know from her letters that she did feel a very strong tie to what she described as her countrymen, and by that she meant the other colonies and not Britain. Margaret would have been very limited in the action she could have taken, which is why I love the idea that if she could have passed the information on from her husband to somebody who could have used it, that she would have done that. She would have been a very brave woman if so. I think Margaret sees Dr. Warren as one and the same thing of her loyalty to her home country. So I think they are completely tangled up in that. He represents America, or what will become America, to her.
There's speculation as to whether or not their relationship was romantic, and some historians think that it was, and others not so much.
Is this how you treat loyal British citizens?
Not British, they're colonists. And all of you will be treated however I see fit until you learn to submit to your king.
Gage was appointed head of the British Army and given the task to enforce the Intolerable Acts in order to quash the revolution. Gage has such a poor reputation because he hired the nastiest, bloodiest group of redcoats he could to interact with the civilians.
Historically, he wanted for America, as we know it, to be part of the arm of England. He was serving his country and serving his king. He was a military officer. He's tried to set an example, I suppose, and the story there had given him a much harder edge.
You know, originally he was designed to be representing the evil empire, but my feeling was I wanted to give him something at his core to make him have tremendous depth. So he is actually, in some ways, pathetic because he really just wants his wife to love him.
In this story, Gage is of a possessive nature. This polarizes the desire for love and the love that Gage has for his wife, but it's not allowed.
Someone can be very mean and angry if they've come from a place of being unloved, and that's actually a wonderful thing that Martin was able to bring with it.
Get me Benjamin Franklin.
Just learning about Ben Franklin and what he did and what he invented and who he was and what a character he was, again, back to the history books and what they don't tell you about him, is, I think, incredibly inspiring for everybody involved.
He really was kind of like one of the world's first rock stars. He had invented a bunch of stuff, and people loved him in France. And when he kind of arrived in different places, it was a big deal.
Ben Franklin was pretty badass.
On the one hand, he thought of so many things. I mean, he just had a mind that kept working, invention after invention after invention. And on the other hand, he loved to drink, and he loved to frolic with the women.
Mrs. Stevenson. Perhaps you can come by later this evening and give me a sponge bath.
You know, in the midst of all the seriousness, he had this kind of frivolity about him. And that's really interesting to play as a character.
He's such an iconic guy, and to really get into that nitty-gritty of what Ben Franklin was actually like was a lot of fun.
If you make martyrs of these men, the people of Boston won't see them as sons of tyranny. They'll be seen as sons of liberty.
I think my favorite scene, being here while they were filming, was very late in the series, where George Washington, played by Jason O'Mara, reads the Declaration of Independence to his troops.
As a motivator for troops before going to battle, what more could you want? So that's how we decided to stage it, like it's William Wallace motivating his troops.
He delivers it with such amazing gravitas, and there's the final line of, in support of this declaration, we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And I just got these goosebumps, and I literally started crying while watching him read the Declaration, like I was like a big fat patriotic baby in this field in the middle of Romania, crying, listening to Jason O'Mara read the Declaration of Independence.
We mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
And David White, one of the writers, came up and he was like, thank you, thank you. I was like, what's wrong with these people? But of course, you know, not being American myself, of course I appreciate the Declaration. But I think for Americans, it's part of who they are as people.
This was a human story with flawed people that then did something great and started America. That means that any of us, as flawed as we are, could do something great.
To work on a project that is so much in the hearts and minds of the American population and what America stands for has empowered me not only as a filmmaker, but as a person to have huge respect for what America at its core stood for and stood up against.
The point of the revolution was the idea that they even had the right to ask the question, who do I want to be? And that's what we have in our country today. That's what America is all about, is that we get to ask the question and decide who we want to be as people.
If we can convey that with this film, then I've done my job.